episode of Drawing in the Background. Today I'm going to go over yet another 2-point perspective drawing and break it down step by step. I'm going to do something a little bit different this time, where this demonstration is going to be broken down into several smaller videos, each one focusing on that particular step of the process. So this video is going to be focusing on roughing out the drawing. Now right here we can see this is what the final drawing is going to look like. But today we're going to be focusing on just the rough drawing. So first we start off with this thumbnail here. Now this thumbnail is super rough because I knew that I wanted a downshot. I kind of had an idea for the style, but there's nothing in particular that I needed to figure out ahead of time. I just needed it to kind of look good and have it fit into the story and the world. All right, so the first thing I like to do is take my thumbnail and I just need to figure out how to set up the perspective. And so normally, even in a rough sketch, there's some perspective lines kind of indicated. And so what I'll do is I'll take the line tool and I'll just try to extend those lines out to figure out maybe where those lines will converge to our vanishing point. And then use the perspective spokes and just hit it right at that vanishing point so that I can get a nice array of lines going across. Make sure not to rush this step. Like, you really want to set up your perspective in a way that's going to be helpful for the composition, because once you start sketching stuff in, it's much harder to make drastic changes to the perspective without having to redraw a lot of stuff. So spend a little extra time and make sure that perspective setup makes sense. Week 3 of my perspective CGMA class, we spent quite a bit of time talking about how to set up for your cone of vision and station points and camera lenses, so I don't want to spend too much time talking about it. But basically, if your vanishing points are too close together, your image is going to start to look a little bit distorted and warped, almost like a fisheye lens. And so we want to make sure our vanishing points are far enough apart. And so what I tend to do is I'll take the length of my image and I'll double that length, and then I'll make sure the vanishing points are around that distance apart from each other. And that way I know I have a little bit of leeway if I end up extending the composition, that everything will stay within the cone of vision. I also like when the vanishing points aren't completely equidistant from each other and one of the vanishing points will favor one side a little bit more. I think it tends to look a little bit better. Okay, so now that our perspective is all set up, we can just go in on a new layer and start drawing on top of it. A downshot like this, it's easy to think that it's just a ton of buildings you need to focus on, but really if you can think of it as there's 3 or 4 kind of focal building areas and make those look really good, the rest can be really simplified. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just taking that first area and just kind of playing around with it, giving it some nice distinct architecture. So I'm just working from that, and then I'm sketching around some of the other buildings. And you'll notice on the trees I'm kind of adding some tone. The reason why I'm doing that is trees are a great way to kind of just block off some empty space, so there's some breathing room between all the architecture. And so that's kind of how I'm using them, just to scribble out and clear a little room visually for the composition. All right, and now I'm hitting up that foreground building in the front. Now, obviously this is going to be kind of one of the biggest buildings in our composition, so I'm going to definitely have to spend a little extra time to make sure that that's working and has really appealing architecture. Cool, I think that's working pretty good for a nice little sketch. But now I want to make sure to add some cars so it feels like an actual city that's lived in. But that's a lot easier to do on a separate layer, so I'm going to lighten out the background a little bit so I can draw on top of it and try to figure out how to design some of those cars and definitely get some reference for it as well. And once again, these cars I'm drawing them super simple. They're just kind of shapes, just so that visually I can see how many cars I'm going to need to make the environment work. Something to look out for when you're drawing something like cars in a scene is make sure that the spaces in between each car are not all the same. I think naturally our brain wants to make things like a pattern where everything is perfectly evenly spaced, but it's kind of bad design, and so we want to kind of break our brain a little bit when we're doing that and make sure that the distance between the spaces have some variation. And that's the nice thing about being able to use layers, and you can copy and move stuff so that it's working better. Cool, I'm pretty happy with how this sketch turned out. It took me like an hour and a half, which felt a little bit long, but I think it's going to make a really cool background when we get a chance to jump in there and clean it up. All right, so this will conclude the first video of roughing out a background, and then the next video we'll jump in and start cleaning this up. Alright, thanks for watching.
Yeah, that came out nice.